All right, welcome back. This is Storm and Silence um, by Robert Thier, Chapter 21, Ambrosian Waste Disposal. Ah, Sir Philip. Both of them looked around as they heard the voice of the unexpected intruder. Sweet little me. When Ella realized who it was, I saw startled relief on her face. When Wilkins realized who it was, I saw startledness on his face. I marched over to the thin young man with the big ears and more or less shoved my hand into his face so he was obliged to press a kiss on it. "Oh, Miss Linton." I nodded graciously and then let him have it. "Sir Philip, I am so delighted to meet you again. I can't say how happy I am to be able to thank you in person for that wonderful ball you gave the other night. The ballroom looked so beautiful, all those exotic potted plants and the little table with the exquisite snacks. There was even solid chocolate. Did I tell you that I only had solid chocolate once before? It is one of my favorite things. As I was saying, it was simply wonderful, and I mean the ball, not the chocolate, although that was pretty nice too. Such wonderful decorations and delightful music and such incredibly mindless baboons for guests, and the chandeliers glittered so pretty I thought I might faint." Sir Philip stared at me nonplussed. He was probably still trying to figure out how to fit the mindless baboons into the long line of compliments. I wasn't going to give him enough time for that, though. And the music, I was simply so enchanting, but I already said that, didn't I? Dear me, my memory sometimes isn't the best one. You know, Sir Philip, I was particularly impressed with the architecture of your beautiful house. I have always had a passion for the architecture. I lied smoothly. Can you tell me who was responsible for such a monument to the modern science of the building? I believe a man called Bartley did the main design, miss. How wonderful, how interesting. How old is he? He designed any other buildings? Where does he live? Does he have any children? Does he design his own home? How long did it take him to build yours? It is so large and majestic. It must have taken him at least 5 years. I was so impressed by it. I can see that. Looking at me strangely, Sir Philip edged away from the window where he had been standing towards the only empty seat beside Ella on the sofa. Maybe he was thinking about protecting her from her seemingly deranged sister. Maybe he was thinking she could protect him. But I wasn't having any of that. Quickly I slid into the seat beside Ella before he could and smiled up at him. "You must tell me all about him. Please, I have a ravenous desire of knowledge. Please oblige me." A peer of the Breton Empire couldn't just ignore a plea from a lady, could he? Approximately 3 hours later, I, Ella, and Sir Philip left the drawing-room, the latter with a slightly dazed look on his face. My aunt was just coming down from my uncle's room, looking disgruntled. In all probability, she had just been refused money to buy sweetmeats for Sir Philip, after having discovered that he had no ingredients for proper snacks in the house. Her face lit up instantly when she caught sight of 3 of us standing in the hallway. "Oh, my dear Sir Philip," she trilled. "Are you leaving already? I'm so sorry for that. I was just getting something ready." "Do not make the effort, madame, I beg of you." He cut her off, and he actually sounded as if he were begging. "As you have noted, I'm just about to leave. I've been charmed. It has been a charming evening. Thank you so much for your hospitality, and thank you, Miss Ella, for your time." "It was my pleasure," mumbled Ella. "And, thank you, Miss Lillian, for that, very interesting talk." "It was my pleasure," I said with a smile. So, what if it was slightly sadistic? While Wilkins hurried away to snatch his hat and overcoat off the hanger, my aunt sidled up to me and, "Where were you enough to the door to hear something?" she asked in a low voice, not aware that I had been in the room the entire time. "What was the topic of conversation?" "Height, beauty, and proportions mainly, I think," I said. My aunt's eyes flicked to Ella, going up and down her figure proudly. "Oh, that is good. Very good indeed. And What feature did he find particularly appealing? Her eyes? Her form? I think the chandeliers in the windows were what he found most beautiful. Chandeliers? Lily, what are you talking? Quickly she cut off as Sir Philip returned to us and performed another bow. I take my leave of you, madame, but I hope soon to return for a tete-a-tete with your beautiful niece. The remark wiped all annoyance from my aunt's face and plastered it on mine instead. Darn it! I would have thought my 3-hour intensive treatment might have been enough to put him off. Apparently not. It wouldn't be enough for Ella to have annoying relatives to chase him away. He would have to discover that she herself was deficient in some major way. Doubtfully, I glanced at Ella's beautiful face and demure demeanor. That was going to take some work. When the door had closed behind him, my aunt clapped her hands. My comment about chandeliers long forgotten. Girls, she exclaimed, we have him. Ella, this man will be your husband, as sure as the grass is green and the sky is blue. Ella paled and grasped the walls to support herself. My aunt noticed neither. When it rains, the sky is gray, I pointed out. And when it is hot in the summer, grass can grow brown. Oh, don't be a stick in the mud, Lily. The two of them will be their happy ending, I'm sure of it. Just as will you, Lieutenant Ellingham. Did I tell you that he's going to come around for a visit, too? What? I turned to face her, horror written all over my face. Of course, my aunt didn't take the trouble to read it. Or maybe she was an emotionally illiterate. Yes, isn't it exciting? She threw her arms up in the air. My 2 favorite nieces married in one go. I started to object to this, wanting to point out that firstly, I wasn't married yet and even engaged, and secondly, I'd never been her favorite niece, but she rushed off before I could say anything, probably to make some preparations for the arrival of Lieutenant Ellingham. I didn't know what she did. I didn't really care, but I soon found out that she needn't have bothered. The lieutenant didn't arrive. We waited for an hour, still he didn't arrive. We've waited for another hour. Still there was no sign of him. At Aunt Bragg's supreme command, I sat at the drawing-room window, forced to look out for him. Only once did I actually see a flicker of movement out of the dark street. But when I looked, it wasn't the lieutenant, but a rather large gentleman in a turban, stooping over something on the ground. Funny. From this distance, it looked almost a bit like Karim. The lieutenant, however, never came. I would have been ready to leave for a long time, but my aunt insisted Ella and I stay in the drawing-room to greet our guest. After 3 hours, even she finally gave up hope and marched out of the room, muttering things under her breath that were definitely not ladylike. Ella looked after her uncertainly, then peeked back at me. What do you think could have prevented him from coming? She whispered, as if he was in the room with us and could hear her if she spoke too loud. I don't know, I said, the beginnings of a disbelieving grin on my face. God's mercy? A miracle? A nice, bloody train accident? Lily, you shouldn't say such things. I grinned at her. Why? What's wrong with God's mercy? You know what I mean. Stop teasing. Why, when it's such tremendous fun? I sprang up from my seat and did a little twirl around the room, more graceful than I'd ever done in the ballroom. Can it be that I am free? What joy is this? What wondrous joy? Ella let out a little laugh. Dear me, Lil, I had no idea you were so poetic. I'm not when I'm sane at least, but tonight I feel a mad happiness coming over me. Is this just a dream, or is he really not here? It's 100% real. Really? You promise? I do, Lil. I do. Quickly I went to her and knelt in front of her, grasping her delicate hand. Do you think he's gone for good? Do you think it's possible I may be free of him? She shrugged, still laughing. How should I know? Or maybe he's just being detained somewhere this once, I fretted. Maybe he'll show up here tomorrow morning just as obnoxious as ever. Maybe, Ella admitted. You're not helping. You're supposed to soothe and encourage me. You're my sister, after all." "Or maybe not," she hurriedly added. "He's in the army, after all. Maybe he's been stationed in some colony. Gibraltar, maybe." "Gibraltar? Why so near? Why not the Caribbean, or, better yet, India, somewhere in the jungle where he can get eaten by tigers?" We started to giggle, like little girls. We couldn't help it. I don't know what happened," Ellis said. Finally, we had control of ourselves. "But although I definitely wish him no harm, I wish he's out of your life forever." She encircled me in her slender arms and hugged me. "Then you can maybe find true love and happiness." "Love? Me?" "Of course, with that young man of yours you told me of." Oh, yes, of course, with him. I had nearly forgotten how much I am in love. Sorry." That night I went to bed exhausted with happiness, still wondering what could possibly have happened to Lieutenant Ellingham. To some extent, I was also afraid. Was it unreasonable to hope he was gone for good? Would he return to try and catch me in the eternal trap of matrimony? And finally, the most intriguing question: why had he vanished at all? Was it an accident, a miracle, or had someone done this? What or who could have that much power? After a while, I stopped my useless wondering, and as my mind drifted closer to sleep, the worries over Lieutenant Ellingham fell away, and unconscious thoughts drifted to the forefront of my mind. Thoughts of another man who had been there all along, hidden beneath the surface. "You are lovely." He had said that, hadn't he? It hadn't just been my imagination. My eyes fell closed, and I began to dream of showers. I had no idea bathroom appliances could be that interesting. Neither the next morning nor the next few days after that did Lieutenant Ellingham put in an appearance. He did not write. He did not send a message through a friend. He did nothing. It was as though he had vanished from the face of the earth. Lucky Earth, in my opinion. Her face was a lot prettier now. I was still worrying about what exactly had happened to him, and especially if it was something from which he would return alive and in one piece, but with time my worry eased. You can't worry too much about problems that apparently have disappeared by themselves when you have ones to deal with that are still very much present, and I had one of those every single day of the week from 8 o'clock onwards. If I had thought Mr. Ambrose had been demanding and short with me before, he was reaching new heights now. He was pressuring me so hard, I was almost surprised I wasn't squashed and turned into lily puree. From having me bring him single files, he went to have me bring him entire boxes, and let me tell you, those are heavy. Did he have any helpful suggestions? Oh, yes. "Mr. Linton, start working on our musculature so you can carry several boxes at once. That would be far less time-consuming. Mr. Linton, walk faster. Mr. Linton, learn to open doors more quickly. Mr. Linton, I'm not paying you for tardiness. Get a move on." I was absolutely sure now that me hearing him call me lovely had been my imagination. Maybe he had said puffy. That seemed a far more likely explanation. As time went by, I noticed that all the files I had carried into his office dated from the same year as the one that had been hidden in his safe. Slowly I realized he was reading up on something, preparing. Had Simmons spilled the beans yet, or the potatoes, or the artichokes? Whatever secret vegetable he was hiding from Mr. Ambrose? Finally, I resolved to ask him about it. In person. This was actually possible now. The file boxes being too thick to be shoved under the door. The connecting door between his and my office was open all the time now. I knocked. "Yes, what do you want?" The customary friendly greeting. Oh, what a joy it was to have a kind and warm-hearted employer. I entered. "Mr. Ambrose, I was just wondering." He listened to my question and took his watch out as he did so. When I finished, he stated, You've just wasted 31 seconds of my valuable time with unnecessary speech, Mr. Linton. Simmons has divulged nothing yet. Now, bring me the file box I asked for. But what's the sense in keeping to question Simmons? I persisted. It's been days since the theft. Whoever has it must have made use of the information it contained, which you still haven't deigned to share with me. Mr. Ambrose's dark eyes flashed menacingly. Do you think I'm half-wit, Mr. Linton? I am sure they would have made use of it if they could. However, the information is heavily encrypted. We have some time left. Encrypted? You mean you invented your own secret language? It is normally referred to as a code by specialists of cryptology, but yes, a secret language if you wish to put it that way. I looked down on the files at the desk. Do you do this for all your papers? I asked, knowing the answer. No. The file was a special case. Now get me the file box I want. Mr. Ambrose. It shouldn't be possible for a man to narrow his eyes while not moving one muscle in his face, but somehow Mr. Ambrose managed it. I notice you're still here, Mr. Linton. Yes, sir. I told you to go. I know, sir. I stayed anyway. Swallowing, I tried to gather my courage. What is in the stolen file? What have they taken from you? His eyes flashed again. They looked more like the sea than ever. But if before they had been stormy, now they were thunderstorms in progress. I already told you that you will never know. I do not appreciate my time being wasted with unnecessary questions. Why won't you tell me? It may surprise you to hear this, Mr. Linton, but as your employer, I am in charge, and you have to do what I say. So if I do not wish to tell you something, I am perfectly well within my rights. Your incessant questions are wasting valuable time. I gave him my most charming smile. Then why not just tell me anyway? It would mean I'd never have to waste your time again. There were a few moments of silence. Nobody could be silent like Mr. Ambrose. His silence invaded your ears and pressed on your mind, making you wish for a single word to relieve you of the freezing, cold emptiness. Because, he finally said, his voice lower than usual, your life has been put in danger enough already. My breath hitched. What did he mean? He couldn't mean what I thought he meant, could he? He couldn't mean that to get that piece of paper, somebody might try to kill me? And the more important question, why the heck would he care if they did? And, he added in a more usual cool tone of voice, because my last secretary sold this secret to my enemy. Something I wish not to happen again. I have plenty of enemies left. Indignation rose up in me. Do you honestly dare to suggest that I might betray you like that? He pondered the question for a moment. Yes, he finally decided, nodding dispassionately. Everyone has a price. I would never betray you, I said, with a bit more force than was strictly necessary. He looked at me intently for a moment, then quickly looked down at the papers on his desk. Bring me the file box I asked for, Mr. Linton. I didn't move. When Simmons gave up his information, I began. I will inform you. He cut me off. Go get the file box, Mr. Linton, now. Ouch. What crawled up his derriere and died. I quickly cut off the line of thinking because it made me think about his derriere, and that wasn't a place I wanted my thoughts to go after the disturbing dreams I had last night. Liar, a little voice in the back of my brain cackled. I'm not lying, I assured myself. I have no interest in Mr. Ambrose's derriere, none whatsoever. Quickly I hurried off to fetch the aforementioned box, and then the next, and for the entire rest of the day I managed to keep my thoughts off Mr. Ambrose's rather nice-looking behind. Yes, I did. And how were things at home? Well, my aunt was pretty miffed about Lieutenant Ellingham's disappearance, but was consoled by Sir Philip's frequent evening visits, then became so frequent, in fact, that Ella missed several rendezvous with Edmund and became increasingly agitated. She didn't even notice my frequent absence from the house while I was at work. My friends did, of course. Since our last day out in the park, a considerable time had passed, and they were wondering how it could be that I had so little time on my hands these days, until Ella let slip that I had a secret lover. Then they laughed themselves silly. "Thanks so much, my dear little sister. Where's the nearest butcher knife for siblings' dismemberment?" "Mr. Linton." "Yes, sir," I panted. "The files are coming." I burst through the door and let the boxes of files drop onto his desk. "Almost acceptable pace, Mr. Linton," he said, sounding quite close to not disapproving and frozen. "Almost." "Thank you so much for the compliment, sir," I huffed, clutching my sides with a grimace. "Bring me that file from over there, will you?" Luckily, the file from over there was not a gargantuan monster with enough weight to break my back, but rather a slim file in a black folder. It was numbered like the other files, but said in bold white lettering, "L.E. from L.L. Waste disposal." I walked over to get it and hand it to Mr. Ambrose. "You seem no longer as distracted as the other day," came his voice from behind me. "Well, I have less dead weight carrying around," I answered distractedly. I was still focused on the black file. Waste disposal. I didn't know that belonged to the business Mr. Ambrose was conducting. Strange by now. I thought I had seen something of everything he did. "Do you remember the man I told you of the other day? The one who wanted to marry me? He's gone. Poof! Vanished into thin air." "Indeed." Seizing the file, Mr. Ambrose flipped it open and placed a big black ink check mark at the very bottom. For a moment I thought I saw a gleam of triumph in his eyes. But surely I was mistaken. After all, what could be so satisfying about getting rid of garbage? "Well, I hope your performance won't be affected like this again." "Yes, sir. If you don't mind me asking, sir," taking back the file, I waved it in the air, "are you expanding your business, sir? I didn't think you were in waste disposal. Are you branching out?" "No. This was a special case I had to take care of. Definitely not a non-recurring venture." He fixed me with his dark eyes and sent a glare at me that was as cold and threatening as an army of banshees and hydras at the North Pole. "At least, I hope so, for your sake, Mr. Linton." For my sake? What the dickens was that supposed to mean? What did I have to do with his waste disposal? Wait a moment. The initials on the file? Before I could let myself think too deeply about those initials, my thoughts were rudely interrupted. Thump, 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 thump. Heavy footsteps of a man running came up to the hallway and intruded into the office. We both stared at the door, distracted. A moment later, it flew open and Karim stood in the doorway, panting. "Mr. Ambrose, Sahib," he exclaimed, the accent in his deep voice more distinct than usual from his excitement. "I have done it. He is ready to confess it all." "Simmons." 1 second, Mr. Ambrose sat behind his desk. The next, he was on his feet, erect, ready to move. This time, there was no mistaking it. There was triumph in his eyes. "Let's go," he ordered, and was already out the door. Karim turned and followed, wanting to close the door to the office behind him. I put my foot in between just fast enough. "Excuse me, you seem to have forgotten me," I said sweetly. Then the bearded mountain grumbled something in some foreign language, probably, I wish I could, in Urdu or Punjabi or some other Indian language. Then he marched after Mr. Ambrose, who was already charging down the stairs. We could hear the harsh staccato of his shoes on the stone steps. "Wait up!" Mr. Stone looked up, surprised as he saw Karim stomp past him. Then his surprise doubled when I flitted by even faster than the large Indian. I got the staircase just before Karim did and flashed him a charming smile. If his face hadn't already been so dark, it would have turned red like a tomato. This was just Ujakum Spiff. Finally, some excitement. If only the bloody man would stop. Mr. Ambrose, wait! I ran down the stairs after him, and behind me heard the Mohammedan mutter again. I caught the word Ifrit mixed in with several expressions that, in spite of the foreign language, didn't sound very complimentary. Oh well, I suppose there were worse things than being seen as a 12-foot-tall demon with fiery wings. Mr. Ambrose, sir, wait, please. Did he wait? Did he slow? Well, let me put it this way. Are lions vegetarians? Probably not. It took me forever to catch up with the darned man. He wasn't running, but he seemed to have the ability to march with military speed, even down a staircase. I just caught sight of him as he stepped off the last landing and into the great hall, which was buzzing with people. I certainly hadn't expected what happened next. The effect of his arrival was earth-shattering. Everybody stopped dead and turned, standing stiff and straighter. No, they didn't just stand straighter. They stood at attention, their eyes wide. Holy moly, I whispered, gazing at the silent crowd. Mr. Ambrose stood at the edge of the hall. He stood on the same level with everyone else. Still, there were, with these stairs fixed on him like that, he seemed to tower over everybody like some Greek god on Mount Olympus, who wasn't above hurling a few lightning bolts at people who didn't worship fast enough. His dark eyes met those of sallow face, whose face actually lost some yellowness, turning white at the eye contact. He gave a tiny curt bow and bent over his books again, back to work. He wasn't the only one. That flicker of dark eyes had been enough. Suddenly everyone was moving again, only now they moved at double speed, and Mr. Ambrose started forward again. Blimey! I could almost feel it radiating out from him, the power, like a spider's web that joined him to every person in this building. The end of the web connected to his employees' brains, right at the part that was responsible for fear and obedience. Maybe that annoying little voice inside me said, just maybe, in comparison, he hasn't worked you that hard after all. Mr. Ambrose headed straight across to the hallway. He didn't seem to navigate through the masses of people. Whether he stepped, people made way for him. Not like they would for a king, forming a guard of honor or something. No, they were far too busy showing him how busy they were, working for him, making more money, to stand around doing nothing. But they never got in his way as he headed for a metal door at the other side of the huge room, marching along a line as straight as a ruler. Taking a large ring of keys out of his pocket, he opened the door, stepped inside the corridor beyond, and was just about to let the door fall shut behind him when I woke up from my daze. Bloody heck, I was supposed to go with him. Wait up! He was so intent on getting his victim and starting to squeeze information out of him that he seemed to have forgotten all about me and Karim, too, for that matter. But when I called, he looked up to see us dashing across the hallway. I was beside him in a second, and after a moment of hesitation, he held the door open for me. I thought, it's only ladies who go first, I panted, not able to conceal my grin. Since when have you started acknowledging my femininity? Since I want to have the door locked behind us, and am the only one with a key, he shot back. I heard Karim come up behind me, huffing, puffing, grumbling things in Punjabi. Now shut up and get a move on. Yes, sir, I smirked and stepped into the corridor beyond. After a few steps, I stopped for a very good reason. The corridor had no windows, no lamps. Before me lay complete and utter darkness. Well, almost complete and utter. Though the open door, a few rays of sunlight shone into the corridor, but they only reached a few yards, then failed. All I could see were these few yards of cold stone floor. Mr. Ambrose, sir. I heard Krim step into the corridor behind me, and the door slammed shut, bringing us from almost complete and utter darkness to utter complete and utter darkness. Well, that's just spiffing, I commented, turning my head from left to right, which made absolutely no difference to the blackness I saw. Now it's even easier for us to walk into walls. This corridor leads underground, Miss Ambrose said. That makes it hard to have windows, and why should I spend money on wall lamps? Yes, why? I mean, the human skull can take a few concussions, no problem. Why should I spend money on wall lamps when it's perfectly possible to carry one single lamp and save a lot of money for oil? A spark flared in the darkness. It caught on something, and a moment later, yellowish light grew a few feet away from me at about my shoulder level. It fell on Mr. Ambrose's classic features, and he jerked his head to the left down the corridor. Come on, let's go. Holding the lamp over his head, he marched ahead of us. The little light was just bright enough to shine a few feet ahead. Luckily, the stone floor was even as a ruler, or I would have stumbled and broken my foot a dozen times. Probably he'd polished it himself with sandpaper to save the building's bill, or he just willed it to be smooth by staring at it long enough. I wouldn't put it past him. The corridor started to slope downwards into the earth, towards the cellars under the Empire House. We went around several curves, and the angle downward remained the same, yet we never came across any stairs. Why is there no staircase? I asked. Sometimes the thing we have to carry down this corridor can't walk on their own. Mr. Ambrose shot back without slowing his pace or turning his head. Can't walk on their own? Blimey. What was he talking about? Bodies? Dead bodies? Anxiety washed through me once again as I thought of his threats to me and of all the things that could happen to Simmons. Maybe I should go to the police after all. Cargo and papers, Mr. Linton. Mr. Ambrose added as if he read my mind. You have an overactive imagination. And you have threatened to kill me and to have a man locked in your basement, which should be the job of the police with whom the Queen of England is kindly providing us. That doesn't exactly inspire confidence. But I didn't say that out loud. I definitely did not want to end up in the room next to Simmons. Finally, we reached the end of the corridor under a massive brick archway that indeed would be large enough to admit large crates of cargo. We stepped into a room. I recognized it. It was the room just in front of Simmons' cell. At the opposite end of the room was a solid steel door behind which Simmons was held. To my left there was another door. I recognized it as the one through which we had entered the basement last time, by the back entrance. Krim strode determinedly toward the door, but Mr. Ambrose touched him lightly on the arm, and the huge Indian stopped in his tracks. Before we go in, tell me, how did you finally crack him? Krim shrugged. I'm sorry, Sahib, that it took me so long. It was my failure. I failed to take into account the character of the English. In what way? I asked, interested. After all, I was English. I had no idea that I shared a character trait with other English people. So far, I hadn't found a lot of common ground. The bearded mountain threw me a glare and shut his mouth. Apparently, he wasn't ready to answer any questions that came from me. In what way? Mr. Ambrose repeated my question, so now he had no choice but to answer. Krim cleared his throat. It sounded like a volcanic explosion, a very embarrassed volcanic explosion. Well, Sahib, I threatened him with the usual European, Arabian, Indian, and even Chinese torture methods. Nothing seemed to terrify him, but that was the wrong approach. As I said, I failed to take into account the character of the English. Then it finally came to me. He cleared his throat again, and then the sneaky son of a bachelor bent down and whispered something in Mr. Ambrose's ear. And Mr. Ambrose, Mr. Immovable Stone-Faced Ambrose, actually lifted an eyebrow. "Is that so? Did it work?" "Did what work?" I demanded. "Oh, yes," Curran said, his grim relish ignoring me completely. "He is talking like a trader in the bazaar. Only he does not wish to sell, but to give it all for free." "What did you do?" I demanded. "Curran, what did you do to the poor man?" This time they both ignored me. "Very well, then." Taking the keys from his pocket once more, Mr. Ambrose unlocked the door and unbolted the door. "Let us see who is behind this infernal intrigue." He thrust open the door and stepped forward into the dark. All right, so that was, I think, chapter 21 of Robert Thier's Storm and Silence, called Ambrosian Waste Disposal Squad. I really like this one. I like the little hint, I guess, thrown in there. I hope you guys enjoyed this reading. I've been really enjoying this book, and if you want to hear more, I would love for you guys to subscribe. But, either way, I'll keep uploading them. I do appreciate comments and likes. That helps me know that you're there, that you're listening, and that you guys want to hear more. So if that's something you want to do, that's great for me. But if not, that's totally okay. Per the usual, you can find this book on Radish Fiction, Amazon, where you can buy a hard copy or get it on Kindle. You can also find it on Wattpad. Although I think that he tweaks it a little bit between putting it on Wattpad and the final published version, but I'm unsure. I think there's 9 of these books, so you guys can go check them out if you want to hear more of the story than what I'm reading. That would be great. But yeah, thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Okay, bye.